Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to do exactly that, really dig deep into a source you, our listeners, shared with us. Today, that source is The Yellow Pages, a Manifesto of Truth by Mr. 76. And, well, this isn't exactly light reading.
No, definitely not. It's a text making some pretty powerful, pretty sweeping assertions about systemic manipulation across, well, many parts of our lives.
Absolutely. The term manifesto kind of signals that, doesn't it? It's a bold and comprehensive critique.
Yeah, we're looking at a text that really challenges fundamental societal structures. Everything from how we're educated to, our understanding of spirituality. And it proposes a path towards what the author sees as like greater individual autonomy, societal autonomy too. Okay,
so our aim here today, just to be clear, it isn't really to validate or, invalidate these claims.
Right.
Instead, our mission is to unpack the main arguments of the Yellow Pages, to really try and understand the core concerns being raised and the framework the author puts forward for change.
Exactly. Understanding the perspective presented in the text itself.
You brought this to us, and it's clear you're interested in perspectives that, well, push beyond the conventional wisdom. So, okay, let's unpack this. Let's dive in and see what makes this text tick.
All right. So the author kicks things off pretty sharpish with a critique of education. That's in the opening chapters.
Okay.
The central argument is basically that the modern education system, which, has its roots in the Prussian model and was influenced by figures like Rockefeller, well, the argument is it was primarily designed to create a compliant workforce.
Not critical thinkers.
Not critical thinkers, not really independent individuals, according to this text.
Right. The text points directly to Rockefeller's funding of the General Education Board back in 1902, and it includes quotes attributed to him and his advisor, Frederick T. Gates, that really seem to underscore this idea. There's that stark quote, I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers.
Yeah, pretty direct.
And Gates is maybe even more direct, saying their task is very simple: to train these people as we find them. It really paints a picture of education almost as like a form of societal engineering.
It does. And this perspective, it's certainly controversial, right? But it does make you think about the maybe underlying goals that might still be lingering in educational structures today.
Yeah, definitely food for thought.
And what's interesting here is how the author describes the classroom. It's called a conditioning chamber.
Wow.
The text highlights things like, the focus on rote memorization over really understanding things. The hidden curriculum.
The hidden curriculum, what's that referring to?
Well, it's the subtle stuff, right? Teaching obedience, valuing yourself based on external things like grades, the pressure for uniformity. And a key point is the suppression of what the author calls the curious child.
Okay.
Think about a kid who's always asking why. At first everyone thinks, oh, how bright. But eventually those questions can start to be seen as maybe disruptive.
Yeah, I could see that. It really does make you reflect on your own experiences, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The author gives this sort of vivid image of a child full of questions, creativity, who's then gradually conditioned to fit into a more rigid mold.
Exactly.
So think back to your own schooling. Did you experience elements of this where your curiosity is always welcomed, or were you maybe subtly or not so subtly discouraged from questioning too much?
It's a good question to ask yourself. Then, moving on to chapter 3, the focus shifts a bit. It's about the programmed self.
The programmed self. Okay.
The author argues that, basically from birth, we're subjected to societal conditioning, through family, media, culture. And this leads to the creation of a kind of false self.
A false self.
Yeah, one built on external expectations. And this, the author claims, disconnects us from our more authentic, sovereign soul.
Okay, so this chapter really hits on those ingrained societal messages, doesn't it? Those phrases we just absorbed growing up, like, I don't know, big boys don't cry, or the constant pressure to fit in with whatever the latest trend is.
Exactly, those kinds of things. And the text really emphasizes the role of television, and now, maybe even more so, social media, in shaping our desires, our insecurities. It even suggests algorithms are subtly manipulating our thoughts and perceptions.
It poses this really thought-provoking question for you, the listener. Who were you before the world told you who to be?
Yeah.
It even includes this almost poetic idea of remembering being a limitless being with memory of stars. So just to break it down, we're talking about the difference between who we truly are, maybe deep down, and who society has kind of shaped us into being. Is that the gist?
That's precisely the gist. And what's interesting is the idea that this false self, this collection of learned behaviors and beliefs, it becomes the filter through which we experience everything, and it often obscures our deeper, more intrinsic nature. The author suggests that a lot of our motivations, our fears, they actually stem from this programmed identity, not our core self.
Okay. So chapter 4 then introduces this concept of gatekeepers of the grid. Here, institutions we usually think of as protectors, like law enforcement, the justice system, they're presented differently.
Yeah, not primarily as protectors of individual rights, but more as entities designed to manage and control the population.
Manage and control.
Where our freedoms are less like inherent rights and more like permissions granted by the system. That's the framing.
A language used is quite evocative, isn't it?
Yeah.
The author describes the uniform as a sigil of submission.
Yeah.
And talks about freedom under constant surveillance as a kind of invisible control. The prison system is even called a profit warehouse.
Which certainly raises questions about the incentives, within that system.
It really pushes you, the listener, to consider, have you ever felt more like you're being managed than, say, truly governed? What does real freedom mean to you, maybe beyond the definitions that these so-called gatekeepers might provide?
Building on that theme of control then, Chapter 5 digs into taxation.
Taxes. Always a fun topic.
Well, the author frames it not really as a civic duty that we all agree on, but more as the price of permission just to exist within the system.
The price of permission. Wow.
Yeah. The chapter lays out what it calls the cycle of taxation pretty meticulously. From the moment we earn money to consumption to property, even after we pass away, highlighting how many aspects of life carry some kind of financial levy.
The author even brings in some historical context, right? Referencing the American Revolution's cry of no taxation without representation.
Exactly. The argument presented is that even with democratic systems, there's still this fundamental question about how much our tax contributions really reflect our individual influence over how that money gets used. It leads to a pretty provocative question for you. How free do you feel when so many aspects of your life are, in essence, financially penalized?
That's a heavy one.
It is. And the author also introduces this idea of conscious currency as a potential alternative, hinting at maybe more direct, more transparent forms of economic contribution.
Interesting. Okay, so chapter then shifts focus to the illusion of choice. The author contends here that many of the choices we think we have in modern society, whether it's who to vote for or what products to buy, are often just limited options within a predefined framework. And that this ultimately prevents us from achieving what the author calls true sovereignty.
Yeah, the two wings, one agenda argument about political parties is a pretty common theme in critiques like this one.
Right.
The author suggests that despite all the heated rhetoric you hear, the fundamental policies, and maybe who benefits from them, often stay pretty consistent.
Okay.
The chapter also draws a sharp distinction between having loads of consumer choices, endless products on the shelf, and having genuine freedom. It questions whether being able to buy more stuff really equates to being in control of our lives.
That's a fair question.
But the core idea here, maybe the most potent one, is the idea of stepping outside the established game altogether. That's presented as the choice the system really fears.
Stepping outside the game. Okay. Then we get to chapter 7, which is titled God in Chains. That sounds intense.
It is. It offers a critical look at organized religion.
Okay.
The author portrays it as a system that has, in many instances, actually obscured a direct personal connection with the divine, replacing it perhaps with dogma, ritual, and hierarchical control.
So less personal connection, more structure and rules.
That's the argument. The chapter contrasts the idea of God as like an immanent force, a divine presence within each of us, with what's called the God of control, often depicted as, an angry judgmental figure used to enforce obedience to religious doctrine.
Right, I see the contrast.
The author raises questions about the historical processes, like how were sacred texts edited and preserved, and suggests that maybe the original sin wasn't an act of defiance against God, but actually forgetting who you are, your own inherent divinity.
Forgetting who you are, that's a different take.
It is. And ultimately, it encourages a more personal, direct form of spiritual practice, meditation, prayer, whatever, resonates, but as a free being, not a subject,
Yeah.
emphasizing the idea that you are the temple.
You are the temple. Okay. Chapter 8 then offers a really interesting, maybe even comforting reframe. It looks at mental health as awakening.
Yeah, this is a fascinating chapter.
The author proposes that many of the labels we use in mental health, depression, anxiety, etc., might actually be signs of an individual's natural rebellion against what's described as a fundamentally sick society.
Basically pathologizing what could be a healthy response to a flawed system.
Exactly. So the core insight here seems to be questioning that immediate rush to medicalize distress, and instead maybe consider the broader societal factors impacting our well-being.
It's a really powerful reinterpretation. The text prompts us to ask, could depression be a form of grief? Maybe grief for losing our true selves or for the state of the world. Could anxiety be a kind of spiritual suffocation, that feeling of being trapped in limiting structures? The author even suggests that what we label disorders might actually be like sacred signals urging us to reevaluate our lives.
Sacred signals.
Yeah. It draws a parallel with some indigenous cultures where individuals experiencing altered states weren't necessarily seen as sick, but maybe as shamans, people with access to different realities.
Interesting parallel.
And the reassuring message that comes through is quite potent. You're not crazy, you're coming alive. Highlighting the need for things like safe spaces, rest, authentic connection, community.
You're not crazy. You're coming alive. I like that. Okay, chapter 9 then digs into division as a tool of control.
Right.
Here, the author argues that societal divisions, along lines of race, gender, politics, all that, they aren't just organic things that happen.
No, their argument is they're often engineered, purposefully created or amplified.
Engineered. To what end?
To keep people focused on fighting each other, basically. Distracted from those who might be holding the real reins of power. It's described as a classic strategy divide and conquer.
The oldest trick in the book, maybe.
That's exactly how it's characterized, the oldest trick in the book.
Yeah.
Manufacturing enemies to create these strong in-groups and out-groups. The author also points a finger at how social media algorithms can, maybe inadvertently, amplify outrage and deepen these divisions.
Yeah, we see that play out.
But the core message is really a powerful call for unity. Your neighbor is not your enemy.
Simple, but powerful.
The author suggests that if we could just transcend these manufactured divides, recognize our shared humanity, then the established power structures would lose their grip. It poses the question, imagine if we united. What could they do? Nothing.
That's a strong statement. Okay, chapter 10 introduces a concept that's maybe a bit unsettling. Controlled opposition.
Yeah, this one can be tricky.
The author suggests that the system, the establishment, whatever you want to call it, often co-ops resistance movements.
How so?
By creating or promoting figures and movements that appear to challenge the status quo, but ultimately they serve to contain dissent within, let's say, acceptable boundaries.
So like fake rebels. Is that a fair way to put it?
That's a pretty good shorthand, yeah.
Yeah.
The chapter outlines some characteristics to look out for.
Like being palatable to mainstream platforms, maybe getting lots of algorithm safe, the text calls it. Offering hope, sure, but maybe not advocating for genuine empowerment that really shakes the system's foundations.
Okay.
And crucially, never truly suggesting a complete step outside the existing framework.
Got it. So sounding radical, but keeping things contained.
Kind of. And the author cautions against blindly following these truth tellers who might demand unwavering loyalty and end up building, cults of personality around themselves.
Right.
The empowering realization offered instead is, you are the revolution. Emphasizing the importance of individual self-reliance, critical thinking, really evaluating all your information sources carefully.
You are the revolution.
Okay.
Chapter 11 then focuses on fear as a weapon.
Fear.
The author presents fear as perhaps the most potent tool of control available, capable of manipulating our thoughts, our actions, leading to what's termed manufactured consent, especially in the face of crises or through pervasive media narratives. Manufactured consent. How does that work, according to the text?
Well, the author lays out a kind of formula, almost. Step 1, create or amplify a crisis. Step 2, generate widespread fear around it. Step 3, offer a solution.
And the solution?
Invariably, the solution involves a tightening of control, a reduction of freedoms. That's the pattern described. Examples are given of what the author considers manufactured threats, and the media's role in amplifying panic is heavily criticized.
Okay, so what's the antidote then?
The antidote offered is cultivating sovereignty and courage. Basically, the ability to act in spite of fear.
Acting despite fear.
Yeah, there's a powerful statement made. A person without fear of judgment, exile, or failure is a person the system cannot program.
Wow.
So the core implication really is to become aware of when fear is being used as a tool against you and to consciously choose not to be controlled by it.
That takes practice, I imagine.
Yeah.
Okay, finally we reach chapter 12, the birth of the sovereign. This sounds like a shift.
It definitely marks a shift towards individual empowerment, yeah. It describes the sovereign as an individual who has actively reclaimed their own mind, heart, voice, body, time, truth, and spirit from all that systemic control we've been talking about.
Reclaim themselves, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The chapter lists what the sovereign is no longer bound by, things like political dogma, constant media noise, limiting social norms, and it underscores what the system supposedly fears most. The fully awakened, truly sovereign individual. Someone who thinks for themselves, questions everything, speaks without asking permission.
Sounds like a powerful state to be in.
It's presented that way. And it emphasizes that this awakening, this rise to sovereignty, it's an internal process first and foremost. It starts inside. The clear message is, you were never meant to bow, you were meant to rise.
You were never meant to bow, you were meant to rise. Okay. And the final chapter we'll touch on today is 13, the new earth.
Right. And here the author moves from all that deconstruction we've seen.
Tearing things down.
To actually envisioning and building something new, a new kind of society. One grounded in sovereignty, truth, collaboration, characterized by decentralized power and more regenerative ways of living.
Regenerative living.
Yeah.
Okay. What does that look like in the book's vision?
Well, the author paints this picture, right? A new earth, where children are encouraged to explore their innate curiosity, where food is treated as sacred nourishment, not just fuel, where work is aligned with individual purpose, not just a paycheck, where truth is deeply valued. The foundational pillars described are things like decentralization of power, self-sufficiency on different levels, education rooted in truth and critical thinking, living in harmony with nature, and always that cultivation of inner sovereignty.
It sounds idealistic.
Perhaps. But it's presented not as some far-off utopia, but as something being actively built now, in the present, through conscious choices and actions.
Not just waiting for it to happen.
Exactly. And there's a final call to action. You are not here to watch the world end. You are here to build the new one. And it even offers concrete starting points. Things like, grow some food, build a practical skill, reconnect with the natural world. Small, tangible things.
Okay. So that brings us towards the end of our deep dive into the central arguments and perspectives presented in the Yellow Pages. As we said at the start, our goal here was really just to understand the core ideas put forth in the text itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's pretty evident that throughout the book, the author places a huge emphasis on the critical importance of thinking for yourself, actively questioning the systems, the narratives that shape our individual lives and our collective reality.
Definitely a recurring theme. So this text suggests this new earth isn't some abstract future dream, but something that's actually being constructed right now through the conscious decisions we make every day. So a final thought maybe for you, our listener. What aspects of that vision, if any, resonate most deeply with you? And maybe what's one small, tangible step you could perhaps take today or this week to start embodying that in your own life?
That's a great question to ponder. And thank you for sharing this definitely thought-provoking source material with us and for joining us on this deep dive today.
Yeah, thank you. We encourage you to keep reflecting on these ideas, keep questioning, and further explore your own perspectives.